lessons for the past, whole 4 months now. But it has been, a break in between because of baptism and other things that was happening. So this morning, I'm going to get back into the discipleship theme. And so for this year, this is what our theme is: disciples, making disciples. Am I sharing the screen or no? Not yet, right? Okay, let me share the screen. So we are in the process of learning about disciples, making disciples. And so this morning, that is what the part that we are going to go into, the Acts 1:8. The theme is, but you shall receive power, and you shall be my witnesses in Jerusalem, in Judea, and Samaria, and to the ends of the earth. And so the first we learned about decisive in following God, from the life of Ruth. Then we learned about seeking intimacy with the Father, and this was from Psalm 42, the same psalm that we read today, that intimacy with God makes us satisfied, with God makes us secure, and with God makes us safe. And then the hindrances that we learned about. Then we talked about how we are separated to serve, and in that we learned from Joshua chapter 24:15, where Joshua says, as for me, you choose whom you want to serve, but as for me and my house, we will serve the Lord. In worship, with your giving, in time, in giving, in fellowship, as a watchman by carrying cross, and as a soldier. Then we turned about C for commitment to church and community. And we learned from Acts chapter 11 how the church was formed, and when the church was formed, they were committed to worship, outreach, discipleship, people growth, possibility of change, and sacrifice, and follow, and faithfulness. And then, so then we come into the next one, which is purposeful in giving. I'm going to skip that because I want to talk about that at the end of this series. Today, I'm going to go into L, being intentional in love. And that is what my theme is for this morning. And in being intentional in being in love, the verse that I want to choose today is in how to show love and respect to others. And the theme is love one another. And let's turn to the Gospel of John, chapter 13. And we are going to read from verse 31 on all the way till verse 38. John chapter 13, verse 31 through 38. And I'll read it. And says like this: when he was gone, Jesus said, now the Son of Man is glorified. God is glorified in him. If God is glorified in him, God will glorify the Son in himself, and he will glorify him at once. Then verse 33, it says, my children, I will be with you only a little longer. You will look for me, and just as I told the Jews, so I tell you now, where I am going, you cannot come. But in verse 34 and 35, Jesus speaks to the people, or to the disciples, and says, a new commandment I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, everyone will know that you are my disciples, if you love one another. Verse 36, it says, Simon Peter asked him, Lord, where are you going? Jesus replied, where I am going, you cannot follow now, but you will follow later. Peter asked, Lord, why can't I follow you now? I will lay down my life for you. Then Jesus answered, will you really lay down your life for me? Very truly, I tell you, before the rooster crows, you will disown me 3 times. Understand this. This is almost the end time for Jesus. And he washes his disciples. It's chapter 13 starts with he's washing his disciples' feet. And then in verse 18 on, he talks about his betrayal. So just as I was explaining in the beginning, when the Spirit of God is upon people, they can see what God intends to do with their life as well. So Jesus was foretelling what he came for and how he would be betrayed by Judas Iscariot. And so Uh, he says in verse 21, I tell you the truth, one of you is going to betray me. So this is the background as John is writing about what was happening during the time that Jesus was with his disciples. You know, Jesus, in the middle of that context, in verse 34 and 35, he says, a new command I give you, love one another. As I have loved you, so you must love one another. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples if you love one another. See, the Bible says in different places to love one another. You know, it sounds so good, and we use this term love so loosely sometimes. And so we it sounds good, but can we do it? That is a question. You know, somebody said once like this, you know, I love mankind, it's people I can't stand. You know, it's the same thing that people say, right? I love every one of you, but the thing is sometimes, not sometimes, but I don't like people as such. So people are sometimes just irritating, you know. Um, Even people at church sometimes can be difficult to love. See, we are all children of God, some we fellowship with each other, but still sometimes we sing this chorus, you know, I'm glad you are a family, you are part of the family of God, but you know, it's sometimes we say it in our mind, not expressing it ourselves to others, and say that, you know, I'm surprised, you know, in a sarcastic way, oh, I'm surprised you're part of the family of God, because we don't want to tell them we love because of the fact that how people react with each other. You know, sometimes even it is hard to love within our own family. You know, uh, I read this somewhere where a man says to his wife, if you really loved me, you would have married somebody else. Basically, he's saying that I cannot stand you, right? So how do we make love a dominating characteristics of our lives? That is the topic that we want to cover, how to show love and respect to others. So when we look at it, your love for one another will prove to the world that you are my disciples, Jesus says. First thing that we can do is make love a priority. You know, loving people is difficult, but the Bible says that in First John chapter 3, verse 11, and it says, this is the message you have heard from the beginning, we should love one another. So when we give priority to love people, you know, uh, you know, time with family, friends, work, prayer, all those things are good. But the scripture reminds us, if I donate all my goods to feed the poor, and if I give my body in order to boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. This is in 1 Corinthians chapter 13, which is the chapter of love, right? Even though we have the freedom to set our own priorities, Jesus made a point of defining certain ones for us. He says, love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. But then he says, this is the greatest and most important command. But the second one is like it. Love your neighbor as yourself. This is in Matthew chapter 22, verse 37 to 39. So Jesus was very explicit when he was saying love one another. You know, we have to be making the priority in our life to love one another. That is the most important thing that we can see. When we prioritize the things that we do in our life, one of the key priorities that we need to keep is to make love a priority. Secondly, understand the importance of love. You know, when Jesus spoke to the disciples regarding the first and the second greatest command, he explained all the laws and prophets depend on these two commands. The importance of love was mentioned in the laws of God, and also in regards to the prophets that prophesied. They made love their priority too. To the people of Israel, as for many believers today, it would seem more logical for obedience to be in according in following everything for the letter of the law. But Jesus explained and said in John 14:15, he says, If you love me, you will keep my commandments. And I give you a new commandment. In chapter 13, verse 34, it says, I give you a new commandment. Love one another just as I have loved you. You must also love one another. So when we are giving importance to the laws that is written and the prophetic words that comes, but if it excludes love, then you are not fulfilling all the commandments, right? Jesus' simple command requires greater strength than any of us naturally possess, because this has to come from within us. It should not be because somebody compels us. The importance of love was emphasized by God. And Paul's interpretation of Jesus' command that love fulfills the law seems equally simple. But if one loves his neighbor, he will not commit the other things that is said not to command in the 10 Commandments. There are people that have given importance for placing these things in public places, but not following from their heart. Love one another is a command that is not, given just so that, it can be placed in public places, but it should come from our heart. It is of utmost importance that God has placed, right? If one loves his neighbor, he will not commit adultery. If one loves your neighbor, you will not lie to him. If one loves your neighbor, you will not covet the possessions that they have. If one loves another, then they will always be having this heart to help others rather than keeping things for ourselves. In the society we live in, one of the things that should bother us is most of the time we always, even for worship, even for love, it is all transactional. It is what I can get out of this. But love is unconditional. That is what the importance of love is. So we have to make love a priority. We have to understand the importance of love. And the third thing is we have to express the unique nature of love. What does that mean? When we demonstrate Christ's love, it distinguishes believers from the rest of the world. Jesus says in John 13:35 again, it says, by this all, that is love, all people will know that you are my disciples if you have love for one another. We need to, and especially in our community, there is a tendency of not expressing that to this, whether it be father to child, whether it be mother to child, whether it be husband to wife or wife to husband. These days, next week is Mother's Day. And I asked, and when I went visiting houses, and I asked, our brothers and sisters, what are you going to do for Mother's Day? And they just laugh. But the thing is, they all know that I love them. But do we know how to express them? This is not a Valentine's Day message. This is the love of God that I'm talking about. But on the other thing, we need to uniquely express the nature of God. Jesus did not say that people will know that you're my disciples if you promote my agenda or wear Christian shirts or you wear the bracelets or any of those. Or maybe, there's another fashion of having fish decal on your car, thinking that we are fishermen of men. But it says you have to express that love to one another. A watching world will be persuaded not when our values are promoted, but when they are incarnated, when we are showing expressly the love of God. It is as though Jesus has given the entire world the right to judge and based on what our actions would be. God's plan from the beginning itself was to reflect his character through us unto others, right? What is his character? God's character is love, because it says God is love, and the one who loves, who remains in him, remains in God, and God remains in him. In this love is perfected with us, so that we may have confidence in the day of judgment, for we are as he is in this world. 1 John chapter 4, verse 16 and 17. I've said this. We as believers are God's newspapers. Nobody wants newspapers anymore. Okay, let's put it in the context that we have now. We are God's ads on TV and on social media. We need to understand the people are watching our life, and we need to express the love of God to others. Christian love will always be the best apologetic that the church has. I was talking yesterday to a friend of mine here in Chicago, and we were just talking as to what was happening with RZIM and the ministries and everything, right? We put the man of God in a pedestal, even though he was having all these things in the back, because we were trying to not see negatives, but only see the positives. But what happened is, because we all put him in a pedestal, the ministry went down, and then people started to be skeptic of God. That is why I say that what you say, what you do, how you walk, how you treat others matters, dear children of God. We need to express the unique nature of love through our expressions. You know, in an illustration, in a Christian illustration, I read this article, and I was really, my eyes was open. Ira Gillette, a missionary to East Africa, returned home to report on his activities overseas, and he related this to the church that sent him as a missionary. He says, repeatedly he had noticed how groups of Africans would walk past government hospitals and travel many extra miles to receive medical treatment at the missionary compound that he was in. So he finally asked a particular group why they walked the extra distance when the same treatments were available at the government clinics. They replied, the medicines may be the same, but the hands are different. You can always say that, everybody else is doing it. Probably true. But are you showing Christian love when you are doing the same things that the world is doing? When you do, understand that you gain a soul for that. So make love a priority. Understand the importance of unique love of God. Express the unique nature of love. Then we need to demonstrate the virtue of love. How do you do that? How do we demonstrate the distinctness of Christian love? Because virtue is moral action we practice. How can we practice the glorious virtue of love? How can we do that? Number one, love values the other person. Christian love, is not lust. It is not romantic, being romantic, and it is not gratification. Love is a wonderful warm feeling. It's not only a feeling. Love is primarily an active interest in the well-being of another person. Are we able to do that? I have seen expressly how you guys have demonstrated this since the time that I've been in your church. Our church is a loving church. Our church is a giving church. But you have demonstrated. It is easy to say that we love you. But it doesn't matter unless you put action to words that you speak. Love acts for benefit of others. God loved us not because we had something to offer him, but because he had something to offer us. John 3:16, we read and we say all this, right? For God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whomsoever believes on him shall not perish but have everlasting life. But God, in that particular statement itself, God loved us immensely that he cared about us more than even his own son. So, W.A. Criswell, who was the former pastor of First Baptist Church in Dallas, he officiated a lot of weddings. So the nervous groom would always ask, Dr. Criswell, how much do I owe you for this? Because they were all, these ministers, the people asked, how much do I owe you for this? Or how much do you want me to offer you for the services you provided? And Dr. Criswell would always smile and look at the groom and say, oh, just pay me what she's worth, that is your spouse's worth. Dr. Criswell made a lot of money from weddings because each man, his new bride was of extravagant value. Again, take the meaning out of it. Don't take, the words that Chris will say. The meaning out of this is, how much do you value the other person? Spouse to others. And I'm telling you, brothers and sisters, we can do whatever. But if we don't love our spouse just the way in Ephesians 5 it says, husbands, love your wife, or wife, respect your husband. How are we treating each other? Do we love each other that much? In families, in relationship to our children, in relationship to our brothers and sisters, in relationship to our church members, in relationship to our neighbors. Do we consider them better than us? Everyone around us is of incredible value to God. We have separated people based on caste, based on color, based on nationality, based on religion, or all those. But in the sight of God, everyone is important. And that is why, when people come in and tell me that these people are not good, these people are good, and we only need to cater to these people, I always say to this, John 3:16, then it is invalid. Because John 3:16 says, for God so loved the world, that he gave his only begotten son, that whomsoever believes on him. It doesn't matter caste, color, creed, nation, religion. It doesn't matter. God so loved the world that he gave his only begotten son, that whoever believes on him shall not perish, but have everlasting life, because it matters to him. And if we value the other person, through our good deeds, our good actions, our good words, sometimes God can work in the hearts of the worst sinner, and that can be transformed. So love values, by demonstrating the virtue of love, we value the other person. Number two, we have to have vulnerability to others. See, as pastors sometimes, and I have seen this, I always believe, as leaders, as pastors, as church members, it's hard for us because the hurt that people have caused us, that we don't want to be vulnerable. We don't want to be vulnerable, especially pastors. I always say to these pastors when I talk to them, be open, be transparent, be vulnerable. Yes, people may sometimes offend you. Yes, people may hurt you. But at the end of the day, when we are vulnerable and we are able to understand that we love unconditionally, not because of what they have done for us, but because God loved us, and so we are transmitting that love, God is going to honor you. Certain churches I go, I can see the disconnect between the pastor and the people, because you are never open, and they are afraid if you are open, what is going to happen? People are going to take advantage of you. Well, if that is the case, then those people don't deserve your love. But on the other side, we need to be open to each other. That doesn't mean that you can disclose everything and anything to everybody. You have to be selective, because there are some things without the vision that you have that the others don't have. You cannot just share everything to everybody. But on the other side, you need to, sometimes the relationship comes in the between and said, oh, you are my brother, so, why didn't you tell me? Well, there are some things that you are not aligned with me in regards to the vision. It might be, sometimes this happens in houses too. There are some people that come in and tell me there's certain things that I should not even share to my wife. And I can't. But that doesn't mean that I don't love them, because there are certain things that I don't even say to the people around me, and people get offended at why didn't I tell them? Because the fact that they would look people differently, because as a pastor, I need to be careful. But love is being vulnerable and being able to understand that even if I made that mistake, or I'm not in that correct path that they are thinking, but still God will take care, because I love them unconditionally. Being on and sometimes there are people that have offended you, and to a point that you don't even want to have a conversation. But are you able to be vulnerable and go to them and make a conversation that you can gain them for the cause of Christ? Christian love is the most costly investment you will ever make. You know, C.S. Lewis has said, to love is to be vulnerable. Love anything and your heart will certainly be wrung and possibly broken. But if you want to make sure of keeping it intact, you must give your heart to no one, not even to an animal. Wrap it carefully around with the hobbies and little luxuries. Avoid all entanglements. Lock it up safe in the casket or coffin of your selfishness. But in that casket, safe, dark, motionless, airless, it will change. It will not be broken. Instead, it will become unbreakable, impenetrable, irredeemable. What he is saying in common words is, don't, hesitate to be vulnerable. Don't be in your cocoon. Don't be in your selfishness thinking that it is all about me. It is about others. Then love entails a cost. It gets its hand dirty. It takes a chance. It goes out on a limb. It takes a gamble. Love makes a statement and leaves a legacy. You cannot love somebody without sacrifice. Love without sacrifice is empty words. Once a founder of World Vision, Bob Pierce, he had advanced leukemia, and but still he chose to visit a colleague in Indonesia before he died. And as he and others walked together through a small village, they came upon a young girl lying on a bamboo mat next to a river. She was dying of cancer and only a short time to live. But Bob, he's also going through leukemia. He demanded to know why she wasn't in a clinic. But his friend explained that she was from the jungle and wished to spend her last days next to the river where it was cool and familiar. So as Bob was looking at her, he felt such compassion that he got down on his knees in the mud, took her hand and began stroking it. And although she didn't understand him, he prayed for her. Afterwards, she looked up and said something. What did she say? Bob asked his friend. His friend replied, she said, if I could only sleep again, because her pain was that intense. Bob began to weep. He reached into his pocket, took out his own sleeping pills because he was in severe pain from leukemia, and he had a hard time going to sleep. He handed the bottle to his friend. He said, you make sure this young lady get a good night's sleep as long as those pills lasted. The Bob's prescription would only be filled after 10 days. But that 10 days would be horrible for Bob. But he made that commitment that somebody else was important to him. We should not be, and yesterday I was having this conversation to my mom, and I said, just because we love somebody, because we are at a pedestal, doesn't mean that we have to be doormats. But Christian love carries costs. Even when the cost is high, we can count on God to bring fulfillment to his followers. True love always costs. 4 things that I want to bring in front of you in regards to being intentional in love. Make love a priority, dear children of God. Understand the importance of love. Express the unique nature of love, which is through our life. We have to demonstrate the virtue of love. How? By love valuing the other person. Love being vulnerable to the others. And love entailing a cost. Dear brothers and sisters, are we willing to be intentional in love? Treat others with respect and love. Because if our church needs to grow, as the worship team comes forward, I want you to make this commitment this morning in front of God and say that, Lord, help me that I would be intentional in love. That I would be people that would be able to live a life that is purposeful in love. And we would be able to be people that will expressly be the image of Christ. I know as we are surrendering our lives, as we are singing this song, this is again written by this man of God who just passed away the other day. It's called Asman Ke Par Jayenge. That love that was shown on the cross of Calvary was so that we would be inheritors of that kingdom. This morning, as we surrender our lives and we sing this song, let us be able to be in his surrender, and let us be able to impart that love that was shown on the cross of Calvary to others. Worship team.